When people ask me what Christmas morning was like in America in the 1980s, I usually smile before I answer, because it wasn't just a morning, it was a feeling, a rhythm, a quiet magic that started long before the sun came up. And if you remember that feeling too, I want you to subscribe to this channel now, because every story here is made for people like us, who lived it, felt it, and still carry it inside. I'm an old man now, but on Christmas mornings back then, I was young again before my feet even touched the cold floor. Lying in bed, staring at the dark ceiling, listening for sounds from the hallway, the low hum of the furnace, the clink of my father moving in the kitchen, and the muffled excitement of siblings trying not to wake the whole house too early. There were no phones glowing in our hands, no notifications, no buzzing reminders of the outside world. Time moved slower, thicker, like the air itself was holding its breath. The house smelled different on Christmas morning, like pine needles from the tree mixed with coffee brewing and something sweet already warming in the oven. We didn't rush. That's the first big difference from today. Nobody was recording anything. Nobody was thinking about sharing it. The moment existed only because we were there to live it. I remember pulling on a sweater my mother had laid out the night before, woolly and a little itchy, and walking down the hallway where the carpet felt ice cold against my feet. The living room lights were always off at first, just the glow of the tree, multicolored bulbs reflecting off tinsel and glass ornaments that had been unwrapped and rewrapped for years, each one holding a memory of another Christmas, another version of us. In the 1980s, Christmas morning was still a family ritual, not an event scheduled between errands and screens. We sat together on the couch, still half asleep, and waited for everyone. Because no one started without the whole family present. That mattered back then. My father would pretend to read the newspaper, even though none of us believed he was actually reading a word, and my mother would remind us to take it slow, to notice, to enjoy, even if we didn't understand. Yet why she said that every year. Today, I see Christmas mornings move fast, wrapped in plastic, captured in seconds, gone just as quickly. But back then, the morning stretched on like a long, gentle song, one we didn't know would someday end. I'm telling this story because if you're listening right now, chances are you remember something like this too. And over the next episodes, I'll take you back there, piece by piece, to a time when Christmas mornings weren't about what we got, but about who we were together. And if that sounds like a place you want to revisit, stay with me, because this is only the beginning. One of the things people forget about Christmas mornings in the 1980s is how quiet the excitement was at first. Like the house itself was waking up slowly alongside us. We didn't tear into anything right away. There was a kind of unspoken order to it all. My mother would gather us again, coffee mug in her hands, hair still a little messy, and she'd remind us that breakfast came first. That alone would probably shock kids today. Presents could wait. That waiting was part of the magic. The kitchen felt warmer than the rest of the house, fogged windows hinting at the cold outside, the radio playing softly in the background, usually an AM station with a Christmas song we'd already heard a dozen times that month. We sat at the table in our pajamas, plates in front of us, and nobody complained. Nobody stared at a screen. We talked, we laughed, we teased each other about who woke up first and who pretended to sleep the longest. My father would make pancakes shaped like lopsided circles, sometimes burning the edges just a little, and my mother would pretend to scold him while smiling the whole time. Those small moments mattered more than we knew. In the 1980s, Christmas morning wasn't just about anticipation, it was about togetherness. When we finally moved into the living room, it felt ceremonial. The tree stood there like it had been waiting all night for us, lights glowing steadily, ornaments catching reflections of our faces as we gathered around. The presents weren't stacked to the ceiling. There wasn't excess. Each gift felt intentional, wrapped in thick paper, corners carefully taped, name tags written by hand in familiar handwriting. I remember the sound of wrapping paper tearing, not rushed, not frantic, but steady and deliberate. We took turns, one gift at a time. Everyone watched. That's another thing that feels almost unreal now. You opened your gift while everyone else paid attention, reacted, smiled, laughed, commented. It wasn't about comparison or showing off. It was about sharing the moment. When someone got something they really loved, we all felt it. When someone got socks or a sweater, we laughed together, because that was part of the tradition too. There was a rhythm to it, a pace that let emotions settle in. No batteries included, no problem. We didn't need everything to work instantly. Half the fun was imagining how we'd use it later. I think about that now, about how patience used to be built into the day itself. Today, everything is immediate. Back then, Christmas morning taught us how to wait, how to appreciate, how to be present without knowing that was what we were doing. As I sit here remembering it now, I realize those mornings shaped how we understood family, time, and gratitude. And once you felt that kind of Christmas, it stayed with you for life. After the first few gifts were opened, something else always settled into the room. A feeling I didn't have words for back then but recognize clearly now, a sense of safety. In the 1980s, Christmas morning felt like the world outside couldn't reach us. The doors were locked, the curtains mostly closed, and the problems of the year were put on hold without anyone having to say it out loud. My grandparents would usually arrive mid-morning, bundled up in heavy coats, carrying the cold in with them and letting it melt away as soon as they stepped inside. Their arrival was part of the ritual too. Hugs lasted longer, voices softened, my grandmother's perfume mixed with the smell of pine and coffee, and suddenly the house felt fuller, warmer, more complete. She always sat in the same chair, purse in her lap, watching more than talking, smiling at the way we moved around her. When she handed us gifts, they were modest, carefully chosen, and often practical. But the way she watched us open them told you everything. That generation didn't need big reactions. A quiet smile was enough. We'd show her what we got, holding things up, explaining how they worked. Even if she didn't really need the explanation, she listened anyway. My grandfather would drift toward the window, commenting on the weather, as if checking that the world was still behaving itself. He'd talk about snow from years past, about winters that felt colder and lasted longer, and even then, I sensed that he was reaching backward through memory the same way I'm doing now. In those moments, Christmas morning felt like a bridge between generations. Kids on the floor with toys, parents on the couch with coffee, grandparents settled in like anchors holding everything steady. There was no rush to clean up, no pressure to move on to the next thing. Wrapping paper stayed scattered across the carpet, crumpled and colorful, a visible record of joy that nobody thought to tidy away too quickly. Today, I see houses where the mess is cleared almost immediately, where everything needs to look presentable again. Back then, the mess was part of the story. It meant something had happened. It meant life had been lived in that room. I remember sitting cross-legged on the floor, turning a new toy over in my hands, reading instructions slowly, savoring each part, while conversations floated above me, fragments of laughter, old stories, plans for dinner later in the day. Christmas morning in the 1980s didn't isolate us by age or interest. It gathered us into one shared space, one shared moment, and looking back now, I realize how rare and precious that kind of togetherness really was. By late morning, the light coming through the windows had changed, softer and brighter at the same time, catching dust in the air and making the tinsel shimmer like it was alive. The television usually came on then, not loud, not dominating the room, just part of the background. In the 1980s, TV on Christmas morning felt communal, not personal. One screen for everyone. Maybe a parade replay, maybe a classic Christmas special we'd already seen a dozen times. Maybe a football pre-game show humming quietly while conversations continued. No one stared at it endlessly. We glanced up, commented, laughed, then went back to each other. That's something I miss deeply. The TV didn't steal the room, it shared it. I remember my father settling into his chair, finally relaxing, shoes kicked off, socks mismatched, watching us more than the screen. My mother moved between the kitchen and living room, checking on food, refilling coffee, straightening a pillow here and there, never sitting for long but always present. In the corner, toys began to come alive. Action figures staged imaginary battles on the rug. Board games were opened but not fully set up yet. Someone always tried out a new cassette or record, carefully placing it on the turntable, lowering the needle with exaggerated care. Music filled the room, warm and imperfect, with that soft crackle you don't hear anymore. Songs didn't shuffle, they played in order, and we listened whether we loved every track or not. That taught us something too, how to stay with a moment instead of skipping past it. Outside, the neighborhood stayed quiet, no traffic, no leaf blowers, just the occasional sound of a door opening somewhere down the street, distant laughter, maybe kids shouting happily as they tested out new bikes or sleds. We felt connected even without seeing anyone. There was an understanding that everyone was doing the same thing at the same time, gathered in their own living rooms, living their own versions of this morning. Today, Christmas mornings feel fragmented, people pulled into different rooms, different screens, different worlds. Back then, The house held us together. I think about how we never once said, "This is special." We didn't need to. The way we lingered, the way nobody checked the clock, the way the day unfolded naturally told us everything. Christmas morning in the 1980s wasn't something we consumed. It was something we inhabited, fully and without distraction. And that's a feeling that stays with you long after the decorations are put away. As the morning eased toward noon, there was a gentle slowing, like the day itself was stretching out, unhurried and content. Someone would eventually suggest going outside, especially if there was snow on the ground, and that idea alone brought a different kind of excitement. Coats were pulled on over pajamas, hats that smelled faintly of last winter were dug out of closets, and the front door opened to a rush of cold air that made us gasp and laugh at the same time. The neighborhood looked different on Christmas morning in the 1980s, quieter and softer, as if everyone had agreed to move more gently. Footprints crunched in the snow, breath turned visible, and for a little while, the whole world felt clean and new. We didn't stay out long. Fingers got cold quickly, and the warmth of the house called us back. Inside again, the contrast felt comforting, like returning to a safe harbor. Wet boots lined up by the door, coats piled on chairs, and the smell of something cooking grew stronger. Lunch was never fancy, but it was dependable. Soups, leftovers, simple sandwiches made with care. We ate together again, sometimes at the table, sometimes balancing plates on our laps, and nobody minded. Conversation drifted easily, touching on memories from past Christmases, relatives who couldn't be there, funny moments that had already become stories we'd tell for years. I noticed now how much of that talking was about people, not things. Who said what, who laughed hardest, who surprised us. Today, I hear a lot of talk about products, prices, comparisons. Back then, the focus stayed human. After eating, there was often a moment of collective rest. Some people dozed off on the couch, kids sprawled on the floor, toys scattered around them like evidence of a well-lived morning. The TV murmured quietly, but no one really watched. Time felt wide open. There was nowhere else to be. I think that's what made those Christmas mornings so powerful. They gave us permission to stop. In a decade known for big hair, fast money, and constant motion, Christmas morning slowed everything down. It reminded us that family wasn't an accessory to life. It was the center of it. Sitting here now, years later, I realize those slow, ordinary moments are the ones I missed the most, because they taught me how peace feels, and once you've known that kind of peace, you spend the rest of your life trying to find it again. By early afternoon, the house had settled into a comfortable, lived-in quiet. The kind that only comes after shared excitement has gently burned itself out. In the 1980s, Christmas Day didn't feel like it was slipping away yet. There was still so much of it left, and no anxiety about how fast time was moving. I remember sitting on the floor, back against the couch, flipping through instruction manuals or cardboard boxes, studying pictures, imagining possibilities. Toys didn't arrive pre-assembled or instantly understood. You had to figure them out, piece by piece, and that effort made them feel earned. My parents watched us from a distance, satisfied not because we were occupied, but because we were together. Sometimes my father would pull out an old home movie camera or a Polaroid, not to capture everything, just a moment or two, one photo, one short clip, and then the camera went away. The rest lived only in memory. That's something I think about a lot now, how memory used to do the heavy lifting. We trusted it. We didn't outsource our remembering to devices. When relatives called on the landline to say Merry Christmas, the cord stretched across the kitchen as my mother talked, voice warm and unhurried. We took turns saying hello, each conversation brief but meaningful. No texts, no group chats, just voices traveling through wires, connecting houses across town or across states. Outside, the daylight faded slowly, and by the time the sun dipped low, the tree lights felt brighter again, reclaiming the room. The same ornaments looked different in the afternoon glow, like they'd aged a little in just one day. I often think about how Christmas morning in the 1980s blended seamlessly into Christmas Day, without sharp transitions. There was no rush to pack it up emotionally. Today, it sometimes feels like the best part is over by noon, like something has already been lost. Back then, nothing felt lost yet. Everything still belonged to us. The hours stretched comfortably, held together by simple pleasures, conversation, shared silence, and the knowledge that being present was enough. Looking back now, I realized that Christmas morning didn't end when the gifts were opened. It echoed through the whole day, leaving a warmth that stayed long after the wrapping paper was thrown away. And that warmth, even now, is something I can still feel if I close my eyes and remember. As the afternoon slowly drifted toward evening, Christmas Day in the 1980s seemed to deepen rather than fade, as if the warmth of the morning had settled into the walls of the house itself. There was no sharp ending to the excitement, no sudden drop, just a gentle transition into something quieter and more reflective. I remember that time of day especially well, because it gave you space to breathe, to absorb what had already happened. Kids wandered from room to room, sometimes returning to the same toy, sometimes just sitting nearby, content to listen. Adults leaned back into their chairs, conversations stretching out naturally, no one in a hurry to go anywhere else. It was during these hours that Christmas felt the most human. Someone would inevitably start telling stories, not planned, not announced, just remembered out loud. My father often talked about his own childhood Christmases, about winters that felt colder, homes that were smaller, gifts that were fewer but treasured deeply. My grandparents would nod along, occasionally interrupting to correct a detail or add something he'd forgotten, and laughter would ripple through the room, soft and familiar. Those stories mattered more than we realized. They connected us to a past we hadn't lived and taught us that Christmas was bigger than one generation, bigger than one moment. At some point, I'd drift away to my bedroom for a few quiet minutes, holding something new in my hands, not to play with it, just to feel its weight, to let the day settle into my memory. From down the hallway, the sounds of the house carried gently, silverware clinking, voices overlapping, the radio playing another song that had already become timeless. Dinner preparations unfolded slowly, almost ceremonially, the kitchen filled with layered smells, roasting meat, warm bread, something sweet waiting its turn. No one hovered over the clock. No one talked about what time they needed to leave. Being present was enough. That's one of the biggest differences I notice now. Today, even holidays feel scheduled, segmented, squeezed between obligations. Back then, Christmas afternoon offered something rare, permission to simply exist together without pressure. Silence wasn't uncomfortable. It was shared. Sitting close, without speaking, felt just as meaningful as conversation. As the light outside faded and the tree lights grew brighter again, the room felt smaller, cozier, as if the world had gently folded inward around us. Looking back now, I realized those quiet afternoon hours were doing important work, teaching us that joy doesn't always announce itself loudly, that belonging doesn't need entertainment, and that some of the most lasting memories are formed not during excitement, but during calm, unremarkable moments spent side by side. When evening fully settled in on Christmas Day in the 1980s, something quiet and almost sacred took over the house, a feeling that the outside world had finally gone to sleep and left us alone with ourselves. Darkness wrapped itself around the windows, and the living room became the center of everything, lit almost entirely by the glow of the Christmas tree and a few lamps left intentionally dim. I remember sitting there and noticing how different the room looked compared to the morning, softer, calmer, more intimate, as if the excitement had matured into something deeper. Dinner unfolded slowly, never rushed, never treated like a task to be completed. Plates were passed from hand to hand, conversations overlapped naturally, and no one felt the need to dominate the room. My parents sat closer together than usual, relaxed in a way that everyday life rarely allowed. My grandparents ate quietly, savoring each bite, occasionally commenting on the food or the weather, their voices steady and reassuring. We kids, surprisingly calm for once, listened more than we spoke, soaking in the atmosphere without fully understanding why it felt so important. After dinner, the table stayed cluttered longer than it ever would on a normal day. Coffee was poured, dessert appeared, and nobody rushed to clean. Someone leaned back and sighed, not out of exhaustion, but out of contentment. The television came on again, but it never took control of the room. Maybe it was a familiar Christmas movie or a rerun we'd already seen, something comforting enough to let your mind wander. We didn't sit glued to the screen. We talked over it, laughed during scenes we remembered by heart, and occasionally fell silent together, letting the sound fill the space. That shared silence mattered. It made you feel connected without effort. At some point, someone pulled out a photo album or held up an old ornament, explaining where it came from, who bought it, and why it had been saved all these years. Those stories gave weight to small things. They taught us that objects mattered because of the people attached to them. As the night deepened, kids began to grow heavy-eyed, heads resting against couches, hands still holding toys they refused to let go of. No one forced bedtime. Adults noticed but allowed the moment to stretch, understanding that these hours were rare and worth protecting. Sitting here now, decades later, I realize how much those Christmas evenings shaped my understanding of home. Home wasn't about perfection or presentation. It was about warmth, patience, and presence. Christmas in the 1980s didn't demand excitement from every minute. It allowed the day to breathe, to soften, to end slowly, and in doing so, it taught us that the deepest joy often arrives quietly, long after the wrapping paper has been torn away. By the time Christmas night truly arrived in the 1980s, there was a peaceful heaviness in the house, the kind that came from a full day lived properly, without rushing or distraction. The air felt warmer, thicker, carrying layers of smells that lingered from dinner and dessert, mixing with pine from the tree and the faint scent of coffee that seemed permanent on holidays. I remember sitting on the floor again, older kids pretending not to be tired, younger ones already half asleep, clutching toys like they were afraid the day might slip away if they let go. Adults spoke more softly now, voices naturally lowering, conversations becoming reflective. Someone always mentioned how fast the kids were growing, how another year had passed, how time seemed to move quicker than it used to. I didn't fully understand those comments back then, but I understand them deeply now. In the 1980s, Christmas night wasn't loud or flashy. It didn't try to compete with the morning. It completed it. The television stayed on quietly, sometimes playing a late-night Christmas special or a familiar movie that everyone knew by heart. People drifted in and out of attention, watching a scene here, closing their eyes. The room allowed for that. No one demanded engagement. My grandparents usually prepared to leave around this time. Coats slowly put on, goodbyes stretching longer than necessary, hugs lingered, promises to call soon were made sincerely. When the door finally closed behind them, the house felt different, quieter but still full. That moment always marked something important, the understanding that the day was gently winding down. My parents moved through the house more slowly now, turning off unnecessary lights, stacking plates, straightening chairs, not as chores, but as part of a familiar closing ritual. We kids were guided toward bed, not pushed, just nudged, still buzzing softly with the memory of the day. In my bedroom, the glow from the tree reached faintly down the hallway, and for a few moments I lay awake listening to the sounds of the house settling, pipes clicking, floorboards creaking, the low murmur of adult voices drifting through walls. That quiet felt safe. Today, Christmas nights often feel abrupt, cut short by travel plans, schedules, or screens pulling us elsewhere. Back then, the night belonged to the house and the people inside it. There was no urgency to move on. Falling asleep on Christmas night in the 1980s felt like being gently tucked into a memory, one that would stay with you long after the decorations came down. A reminder that for one full day, the world had slowed enough for family to truly exist together. Christmas morning memories didn't disappear when the night ended. They lingered into the days that followed, and that was especially true in the 1980s, when the holiday felt like a season instead of a single date on the calendar. I remember waking up the day after Christmas and feeling a quiet satisfaction, like the house itself was still humming from what had happened. The tree lights were usually still on when I came into the living room, the room dim and peaceful, wrapping paper folded into bags but not thrown away yet, toys resting where they'd been left the night before. Nothing had been reset, nothing had been erased. In the 1980s, we didn't rush to move on from Christmas. We lived inside it for a while. Breakfast the next morning tasted different, slower, more relaxed. My parents sat with their coffee longer, talking about how nice the day had been, replaying moments out loud. Who said what? Who laughed hardest? What surprised them most? That replaying mattered. It turned moments into memories. We kids returned to our gifts with fresh eyes, discovering details we'd missed the day before, rereading instructions, setting things up more carefully. There was no pressure to get bored and look for something new. What we had was enough. I think about how rare that feels now, how quickly novelty wears off in modern life. Back then, Christmas gifts weren't disposable entertainment. They were companions for the winter. Outside, the neighborhood slowly came back to life. You'd see lights flick on in other houses, smoke rising from chimneys, neighbors stepping out to wave or exchange a few words. There was a shared understanding that everyone had just lived through something similar, their own version of Christmas morning, their own living room filled with memories. That sense of quiet community meant something. We didn't need to document it to feel connected. As the days passed, relatives' visits were talked about again and again, grandparents' comments repeated fondly, small gestures remembered and appreciated more with time. Christmas in the 1980s didn't peak and vanish. It softened and spread. Even taking the tree down weeks later carried emotion. Ornaments were wrapped carefully, each one sparking a brief pause, a memory from this year or years before. I see now that Christmas morning mattered so much because it anchored us. It reminded us who we belonged to and where we came from. Today, holidays often feel like performances, something to be optimized or captured. Back then, Christmas morning didn't ask anything from us except our presence, and that presence shaped how we understood family, gratitude, and time itself. Sitting here now, looking back, I realized that the true gift of those 1980s Christmas mornings wasn't found under the tree. It was the feeling that we were exactly where we were supposed to be, surrounded by people who knew us, loved us, and gave us a sense of home that still lives inside me all these years later. As the years went by, I didn't realize how deeply those Christmas mornings in the 1980s were shaping the way I would measure happiness for the rest of my life. At the time, it all felt ordinary, almost guaranteed, as if Christmas would always arrive the same way, with the same people, in the same house, following the same gentle rhythm. That's one of the quiet tricks of youth. You assume the moments that define you are permanent. Looking back now, I see how fragile they really were, and how precious. In the days after Christmas, school stayed closed, the pressure of schedules loosened, and the house remained a kind of winter shelter. Toys stayed spread across the living room floor. Board games were half finished. Puzzles remained on tables for days at a time. Nobody felt the need to put life back into neat boxes immediately. My parents seemed calmer during that week, less driven by clocks and obligations. Mornings started later. Evenings stretched longer. Conversations wandered without purpose, and somehow that made them more meaningful. When friends came over to see what each other had gotten for Christmas, it wasn't about comparison. It was about sharing, demonstrating, explaining, reliving the excitement together. We sat on the floor side by side, passing things back and forth, imagining possibilities, planning how we'd use them in the weeks ahead. There was patience built into those interactions, patience that feels almost foreign now. I notice today how quickly everything moves, how little time we give experiences to settle before replacing them with something new. In the 1980s, Christmas morning didn't end when the tree came down. It echoed quietly through winter, shaping how the season felt, how the house sounded, how family interacted. Even arguments felt softer during that time, shorter, less sharp, as if the memory of Christmas morning still hovered nearby, reminding everyone of what really mattered. Sitting here now, older and more aware of how quickly time slips through our hands, I realize those mornings taught me lessons I didn't know I was learning. How to slow down, how to be present, how to find meaning in shared silence and simple rituals. Today, when I see Christmas mornings filled with screens, schedules, and distractions, I don't judge, but I do feel a quiet sadness for what's been lost. Not the decorations or the traditions themselves, but the unspoken understanding that this time was sacred, protected from the rush of the outside world. Those 1980s Christmas mornings gave us something rare, a pause, a sense of belonging that didn't need explanation. And even now, decades later, when the house is quiet and the lights are low, I can still feel that pause, that belonging, reminding me of who I was, where I came from, and what Christmas was truly meant to be. Somewhere along the way, without me noticing exactly when it happened, those Christmas mornings from the 1980s stopped being memories I revisited occasionally and became a quiet measuring stick I carried with me through life. Every Christmas after, whether good or disappointing, loud or lonely, I found myself unconsciously comparing it to those mornings, not because they were perfect, but because they felt whole. In the 1980s, Christmas morning didn't feel like it was competing with anything else. There was no sense that something better might be happening somewhere else. No fear of missing out. We were exactly where we were supposed to be, and that certainty wrapped around us as tightly as the blankets we shuffled around in before breakfast. I think about how rare that feeling has become. Today, even on holidays, attention is divided. pulled in a dozen directions at once. Back then, attention stayed put. It rested on faces, on voices, on shared silence. As I grew older, moved away, started my own family, I tried to recreate parts of those mornings, sometimes consciously, sometimes without realizing it. The same slow start, the same insistence on sitting together, the same refusal to rush through the day. But I also learned that what made those 1980s Christmas mornings special wasn't something you could manufacture. It was the result of a culture that still allowed time to stretch, that didn't demand constant productivity or stimulation, that respected quiet as much as excitement. I remember returning home years later, after life had changed us all a little, standing in that same living room, now rearranged, furniture replaced, walls repainted. The tree stood in a slightly different corner, the ornaments fewer, some missing, others newly added. And yet, for a moment, if I closed my eyes, I could still feel it. The echo of laughter, the patience, the sense of safety that once lived there so naturally. That's when I understood that Christmas morning in the 1980s wasn't tied to objects or even to the house itself. It lived in the way we treated one another during those hours, the way adults slowed themselves down for children, the way children learned to wait, the way everyone understood, without saying it, that this day mattered. Today, when I watch younger generations move through Christmas, I don't blame them for how different it feels. The world changed. Life sped up. But I do wish they could experience, even once, a Christmas morning where nothing interrupts the moment, where memory is trusted instead of recorded, where the greatest luxury is time together without distraction. Because those mornings gave us something that lasted far longer than toys or traditions. They gave us a deep, steady sense of belonging. And as an old man looking back now, I can say with certainty that belonging, felt quietly and shared freely, was the greatest gift Christmas in the 1980s ever gave us. With age comes a strange clarity, the kind that lets you see patterns you were blind to when you were living inside them. And when I look back now, I realize that Christmas mornings in the 1980s were quietly teaching us how to live, not just how to celebrate. They taught us that anticipation could be savored, that joy didn't need to be loud to be real, and that family wasn't something you scheduled, it was something you inhabited. Back then, nobody talked about mindfulness or presence. Yet that's exactly what those mornings demanded from us. You couldn't rush them without feeling like you were missing something. You couldn't multitask because there was nothing else competing for your attention. The house itself set the pace. The creak of the stairs, the hum of the heater, the soft glow of the tree all seemed to say, slow down, stay here. I think about how different that feels from today, where even meaningful moments are often interrupted by buzzing phones or the urge to capture everything before it slips away. In the 1980s, we trusted the moment to stay with us without proof. Memory wasn't fragile back then. It was strong because it was lived fully. I remember how my parents never seemed stressed on Christmas morning, even if money was tight or the year had been hard. Whatever worries they carried were set down, at least for that day. That alone created a sense of safety that wrapped around us kids like a blanket. We didn't need to know the details. We just felt that everything was okay. As I grew older, I began to understand what a gift that was. Safety isn't something you can buy or wrap. It's something you create through consistency, patience, and presence. Christmas mornings in the 1980s offered all three. Even the imperfections mattered. Burnt toast, tangled lights, a gift that didn't quite land the way it was intended. Those small flaws made the day feel human and real, not curated or staged. Today, I sometimes see Christmas presented like a performance, polished and optimized, and I wonder if something essential gets lost in that pursuit. Back then, nobody was trying to make memories. We were just living, and the memories formed naturally, quietly, and permanently. Sitting here now, decades later, I can still close my eyes and place myself in that living room, feel the carpet under my hands, hear the low murmur of voices, see the glow of the tree reflected in familiar faces. That ability to return there, even briefly, has become more valuable to me than anything I ever unwrapped. It reminds me that the best parts of life often happen slowly, without announcement, and that Christmas mornings in the 1980s weren't just holidays, they were lessons in how to be present. Lessons I'm still grateful for all these years later. There's another truth about Christmas mornings in the 1980s that only becomes clear with time, and that's how deeply they were rooted in trust. We trusted the day to unfold without forcing it. We trusted the people around us to be enough. We trusted that joy didn't need to be chased because it would arrive on its own schedule. That trust showed up in small ways. Parents trusted kids to handle their gifts carefully, to appreciate them, to take turns. Kids trusted that even if they didn't get everything they hoped for, the morning would still feel complete. No one talked about expectations, but somehow they were aligned. I think about how rare that alignment feels now. Today, Christmas often arrives with pressure attached. Pressure to impress, to document, to make everything look perfect. In the 1980s, perfection wasn't the goal. Comfort was. Familiarity was. The same ornaments came out year after year, some chipped, some faded, all of them known. The same traditions repeated themselves, with only slight variations, and instead of feeling boring, that repetition felt grounding. It told us who we were. I remember noticing how adults seemed different on Christmas morning. Softer somehow. Voices were gentler. Arguments were postponed. Even people who didn't always get along made an effort, not because anyone demanded it, but because the day itself seemed to ask for kindness. That atmosphere shaped us kids more than any lecture ever could. We learned empathy by watching it. We learned patience by being required to wait. We learned gratitude not through speeches, but through example. As the years passed and those Christmas mornings became fewer than only memories, I began to understand how intentional those environments really were. Even if no one used that word back then, creating a slow, shared morning took effort. Someone had to wake up early to start coffee. Someone had to insist that everyone sit together. Someone had to say, gently but firmly, "Not yet. Wait for your sister. Wait for your brother." Those small acts created something larger than the sum of their parts. Sitting here now, I realized that Christmas mornings in the 1980s were built on an unspoken agreement that people mattered more than things. That time together was worth protecting, and that one day out of the year could be set aside as sacred without needing to be labeled that way. That agreement shaped a generation, and even though the world has changed, even though life feels louder and faster now, I still believe there's something to be learned from those mornings, not by trying to recreate them exactly, but by remembering what they valued: slowness, presence, trust, because those values don't belong to a decade. They belong to people, and they're still waiting to be remembered. As I look back now, what strikes me most about Christmas mornings in the 1980s is how naturally they taught us a sense of continuity, the feeling that life was part of a longer story and that we had a place within it. Nothing about those mornings felt isolated or disposable. The gifts weren't meant to impress strangers. The meals weren't meant to be photographed. The moments weren't meant to be broadcast. They were meant to be lived and then quietly carried forward. I remember how certain phrases were repeated every year. The same jokes, the same gentle reminders, the same comments about the weather or how tall the kids were getting. At the time, it all felt predictable. But now I see that predictability as a kind of emotional shelter. It told us that some things could be counted on, even as everything else changed. In the 1980s, Christmas morning gave us a sense of emotional permanence. It showed us that family wasn't something you had to reinvent constantly. It was something you returned to. As I grew older and life inevitably scattered us in different directions, those memories became reference points. When things felt uncertain or unstable, I'd find myself remembering the sound of that living room, the way voices overlapped without competing, the way silence felt comfortable instead of awkward. That memory reminded me that connection didn't require constant effort or novelty. It required care and time. I also think about how those mornings shaped our understanding of generosity. Giving wasn't loud or performative. Gifts were offered with a quiet hope that they would be useful, appreciated, or simply enjoyed. Gratitude wasn't demanded. It was modeled. You learned how to receive by watching others receive. That kind of learning stays with you. Even now, when I give a gift, I'm less interested in the reaction and more interested in whether it will become part of someone's life. That instinct came from those Christmas mornings. Today, so much of our culture encourages us to chase bigger moments, louder emotions, faster satisfaction. The 1980s Christmas morning stood gently against that current. It reminded us that fulfillment could be found in repetition, in routine, in sitting together doing very little. Sitting here now, I realize that those mornings didn't just make us happy, they made us steady. They gave us an internal rhythm that we could return to long after the house grew quieter, long after the tree was packed away for the last time. And perhaps that's why these memories feel so alive even now. They weren't built on spectacle. They were built on presence. And presence, once experienced deeply, never really fades. There's a moment that comes later in life, usually when the house grows quieter than you ever expected it to, when memories stop being something you revisit casually and start becoming places you return to for comfort. That's when Christmas mornings from the 1980s took on a new meaning for me. They stopped being just fond recollections and became reminders of what it feels like to be grounded. I remember the first Christmas when some familiar faces were missing, chairs empty, voices absent. The morning still happened, the tree still glowed, gifts were still exchanged, but something subtle had shifted. And that's when I understood how much those earlier mornings had shaped my sense of wholeness. They had given me a blueprint for togetherness that I carried forward, even when circumstances changed. In the 1980s, Christmas morning wasn't fragile because it was perfect. It was resilient because it was simple. You didn't need everything to be just right for it to work. You needed people willing to slow down and share space. As families grew older and more scattered, that lesson became invaluable. I found myself trying to recreate the feeling more than the tradition. The feeling of waiting for everyone before starting. The feeling of sitting together without distraction. The feeling of letting the day unfold instead of controlling it. Sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't, but the intention itself mattered. I think about how different that is from today's version of the holiday, where so much energy goes into preparation and presentation that there's little left for presence. Back then, presence was the main event. Everything else was secondary. Even disappointment had a place. If a gift didn't quite hit the mark, it was met with humor, with grace, with an understanding that effort mattered more than outcome. That attitude shaped how we handled other parts of life too. We learned resilience quietly, through shared moments rather than lectures. Sitting here now, older, more reflective, I see that Christmas mornings in the 1980s gave us emotional tools we didn't know we were receiving. They taught us how to sit with one another without filling every second. They taught us how to wait, how to listen, how to notice. Those skills don't expire. They become more valuable with time. When the world feels too loud or too fast, I return to those mornings in my mind, not to escape the present, but to remember how to inhabit it more fully. The glow of the tree, the murmur of voices, the patience built into the day all remind me that life doesn't need to be constantly exciting to be meaningful. Sometimes, the quiet continuity of family, felt deeply and shared gently, is more than enough.